All number.
Yeah, all number. But let's talk about Aidan Hutchinson. I think that's the exciting part because we talked about Hall of Famers earlier, and I think with Hutch, you just kind of assume he's Hutch, he's great. But is there another level Hutch can get to? You know, Defensive Player of the Year winner. He was fourth in the league in sacks last year, coming off a broken leg. People need to understand that as well. But I'll ask the question to you guys. Dan was talking high about him. He's been really good lately. Obviously, we know what he is. But is there another level for Aidan Hutchinson?
Who wants to lead?
Go ahead, J. Raj.
Yeah, I mean, there's always an opportunity to get better, but I think we need to start off with this: top 5 in sacks, first in pressure, top 3 in win rate, close to the top of the league in time to pressure and time to sack, and his get off for his size is really good. So like Aidan Hutchinson's already, I don't want to say butting up against his ceiling, but he's really, really, really good. And so what is the next tier? Well, it's Myles Garrett, right? Like Myles Garrett is from another planet. How do you tap into that level of talent? And you know, it's just continuing to tweak and fine tune and get a little bit better in all the things that you already do really well. But I will say, being able to practice daily against Penei Sewell, to refine those techniques against your equal in the world on the blocking side is the best thing that Hutchinson could possibly ask for. You know, all these other great edge rushers don't have, or very few of them have that great counterpart in practice to push them in that iron sharpens iron way. And so, you know, I think Sewell is such a key to where Hutchinson's already reached, because he's grown so much since what I thought was a pedestrian rookie year, despite the sack numbers, to where he is now, and you know, creating that ceiling for him to get even a little bit better.
Yeah, I think the area where Hutch stands to improve the most this year, and this might sound counterintuitive, is by playing a little bit less each game. And the Lions, it appears on paper, finally have a defensive line that will allow him to do that. He was the only defensive end in the NFL last year in the regular season who played over 1,000 snaps. He plays a huge load. And over the course of a year, you know, that has to wear on you, and even over the course of a game. And, you know, that's something that Aidan has even acknowledged. And I think he talked about it in the spring. I asked him again when we had him on our Fox 2 training camp special, hey, with these fresh legs on the edge now in DJ Wanham and Derek Moore, while of course you want to be out there for every single play, could you stand to benefit, do you think, from a few more breathers per game? And he said, yeah, I think so. And he actually said that we began to do that by the end of last season. And I felt it later in games where I had like a little extra pop that I might not have had before. And sure enough, if you go back and look at his deployment and his production at the end of last season, he was playing over the first 13 games 93% of the Lions' defensive snaps. And over the last 4, that fell to 83%, which feels a little bit more realistic. And over those 4 games, 6 sacks. Now, it doesn't mean that there is a direct correlation between those two things, but when he acknowledges it himself that he felt like he had a little extra pop, it's worth exploring. And I asked Shep that same question maybe 2 weeks ago, that, you know, with Wanham and Moore, do you guys consider giving Hutch a few extra blows per game? And, you know, he hits you with the first retort, which is always, yeah, you come down and tell Hutch you're not playing, 95% of the snaps in this game. But he went on to sort of concede. Yes. He said, seriously, absolutely. That is something that they're thinking about, because he acknowledges the wear and tear over 21, 22 weeks just takes its toll on the body. When you're asking a guy to play 90%, 95% of snaps every single week, especially when he is playing a highly physical position where it's like shock and shed, as Shep said, every play. And so, you know, he said, you want to get to a point where Hutch doesn't feel like I got to carry this load. I got to do this by myself. You want to get to a point where he can think to himself, all right, I'm tired. Let me tap my head and let my brother come get some. So I do think that they're equipped for the first time to scale back just a little bit on Hutch's use. And they should feel, and he should feel, the benefit of that late in games and late in the season.
I do think that can go a long way, Birchie. I think that's a good point to bring up. Something I'll talk about, like I remember Hutch's 2023 season, his second year in the league. like I want to say the majority of that season, people were kind of disappointed in his production. He finished that year with 11 and a half sacks and 100 pressures. I think the pressures were second or first in the league among edge rushers. Now, the final 2 games of the year, game number 16 and 17, he had 3 sacks against the Cowboys, and he finished with 2 sacks in week 18 against the Vikings. Before that, he only had 6.5 sacks through the first 15 games of the season. And I was trying to tell everyone, like, this guy's productive. He's just not finishing correctly. And, like, he doesn't have a ton of help on the edge, but he's having a really good season. He just needs to learn how to finish some of these sacks a little bit more. And then he goes off and he has 5 sacks in the last 2 games. Everyone's like, oh, that was a pretty good year. I'm like, okay, like I'm glad we're on the same page. You look at what he did last year, and obviously he was on such a torrid pace in 2024. I would have loved to see what he did with a full season of games that year. I think he probably would have had like 17, 18 sacks at his pace. But even last year, another 100 pressures. This time, he gets up to 14 and a half sacks. And now everyone's like, oh, this guy's elite. Like, this is the Hutch that we're talking about. I'm like, he was basically doing this. He just didn't have the help on the other end, funneling things back his way after he's creating pressure. That's what can limit you from 11 and a half sacks to 14 and a half sacks when you do have a little bit of help on the edge. And Al-Qadim Muhammad, what he did last year, helped Aidan. This year, you're talking about the rotation of guys that are going to be opposite of him. Derek Moore, we saw what he did in practice today. He was tearing stuff up. I'm sure we'll talk about him later this episode, but he had a great day. DJ Wanham, we've seen what he can do, and we know what he can be in this league. Tyler Lacey playing that big end. They're going to have a rotation of guys that I'm really comfortable with doing their job. And I think that Hutch is going to appreciate this year, having that consistent help across from him. And then you think about some of those games last year where Hutch would have a sack and then would get called back because of a penalty by someone else, like Terry On or Brian Branch or something like that. Like probably 3 sacks that were taken away off his total last year. He probably could have had like 17 and a half last year, for being honest. So I absolutely think, we're talking about the question, is Hutch poised for even more? Based on what we're seeing in practice right now, I would say yes. And I think the question is, can he get the help opposite of him to create that environment to where he can take his game to another level? Because he's been consistent really for 3 years now at this level. And he's finishing more. He's got a better pass rush repertoire. Going against Sewell every day, like you said, Justin, is continuing to make this guy better. And now he's at a point where he is making young guys better going against him. We see what he's doing for Blake Miller. Blake Miller is getting a firsthand education in defending Aidan Hutchinson. Yeah. He's probably getting a D in that right now, but it's okay. That's Aidan Hutchinson, man. He's going to give a lot of people that. So I look at his development over the last 2-3 seasons, and this guy is at another level. Is he quite the Myles Garrett conversation? No. That doesn't mean he's not an all-pro talent, and he really is. And we're seeing that in practice. We've seen that last year. I do think he's going to continue adding to his game and taking his game to another level. I just think I look at what's around him in training camp, and I really like the setup they have for him between Derek Moore, DJ Wanham, Tyler Lacey. I think these guys are going to play within the structure of the defense, funnel things back his way, and he just has to take care of business, which I think he will do.
I just want to statistically hammer home Colton's point here on the 23 season. Hutchinson in the middle of that year and even kind of bleeding into the second half had a 7-game stretch where he had 1 game with 1 sack. He had 2 sacks over the course of 10 games. And that's not acceptable for great players. You can say he's pressuring and having an impact, but if you're not finishing and getting those sacks, like, great players don't have those kind of lulls. He goes into that 23 season before he breaks his leg and sacks in 4 out of 5 games. Last year, he had sacks in 12 out of 17, and I don't think had more than a back-to-back stretch without a sack. And, if you want to compare it to Myles Garrett had sacks in 13 out of 17. So the consistency and the sack production consistency for Hutchinson's really what has taken off here in the last 2 seasons.
Yeah, and if we're going to start comparing every defensive end to Myles Garrett,
the greatest defensive player of all time.
Sweet. No one's as good as Myles Garrett. Exactly. I was going to say, he's in the conversation for greatest defensive player ever. So if you want him to be Myles Garrett, you're going to be forever disappointed. It doesn't mean he's not one of the 25 best players in the NFL.